Has higher education become a business around the world? University and college fees have been on the rise, with many students unlikely ever to pay off their debts, we're told. Are students now thinking and behaving and indeed being treated like consumers? And if so, what impact will that have on institutions and the culture of learning? You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. Well, there was a time, wasn't there, when university study was about partying with your friends while enriching the mind, or so I'm told. Now, with higher fees and a tighter job market, students are demanding value for money. Has higher education just become another marketplace?
Higher education is supposed to be an investment in the future. There's a strong link between levels of qualification and prospective earnings. But is the cost of a degree always worth it? Are educational institutions treating students like consumers? And does that devalue tertiary qualifications? Different countries have different education systems. Some have either low tuition fees or no fees at all. In England, the US and Australia, students pay the highest fees in the world. Public universities offer more affordable alternatives compared to private ones, but not every country has both options. Fees in England tripled in 2012 to $12,000. For overseas students, it's even double that. Most are relying on student loans to pay the fees. But a new report shows that more than 70% of students who left university last year in the UK are never expected to finish repaying their loans. Student loan debt is a global burden.
Education should not be a privilege in South Africa. Everybody must have the right to study, you know. You have the missing middle who do not qualify for loans, even in banks or financial aid. Where else should they go, you know? We are tired, so we are saying the system must listen.
Poorer students' decisions are controlled by the fees they pay, restricting opportunities. In the US, those with a bachelor's degree earn 73% more than those who only have a high school diploma. Has the marketisation of education changed how students approach their days on campus? Some universities prefer a fees system because they're less dependent on the government. But critics of user pays argue education is a public good, where each generation contributes to institutions. Higher fees may produce a better experience, but students expect to get better value for money. This year, UK students joined a class action lawsuit to claim millions in compensation for teaching missed over lecturer strikes. A 2017 survey found that for the first time, more students in England think their degree is poor value than good value. A rating scheme scores institutions according to how many graduates find work. In the last 10 years, British universities have been handing out higher class degrees at an unprecedented rate. Liverpool attributed the rise to recruiting more able students through a Chinese university. With tuition fees rising and universities maximising profit, has higher education become a marketplace? Have students become consumers, controlling academic judgment? Is the drive for profit dumbing down the power of learning?
And I'm very glad to say that with us at the round table today we have Dominic Scott, Chief Executive of the UK Council for International Student Affairs, Vidya Ramesh, who's recently graduated, I have to tell you, with a first in history from the University of Cambridge. She says students are being treated like consumers. Sophie Sandor's with us, former Education Programme Manager at the Institute of Economic Affairs, who is setting up a low-cost secondary school, and Graeme Atherton's here, Director of the National Education Opportunities Network. How much has changed at universities in the last 20 years, would you say? And to what effect?
Well, I'm going to leave to these clever people to talk about the domestic scene. I'm really interested in the international scene.
Well, that's where there's been a big change as well.
Well, there has, but in fact, it's a gradual change because the UK has been recruiting international students for 200 years. The big change, I think, probably happened in the mid-90s when suddenly big macro economies like China and India suddenly increased the demand tenfold. And so we've moved from about 100,000 international students to now 450,000 international students. So there's a huge expansion, but there's been another wave that's been happening at the same time. It's not just been about international recruitment, it's been about internationalization. In the same way as companies have wanted to internationalize, universities have wanted to internationalize. That's getting talent from anywhere around the world.
And that talent, if you want to call it that, will want to get value for money. In other words, they'll want to get a good degree. So are universities pandering to the idea that these people come in from overseas, they're paying good money, and they want to come out with a good result, regardless of whether they're that bright?
I think there's no evidence to suggest that entry standards have gone down over the last 10 or 20 years, but people are desperately keen to get into, especially elite universities in the UK, to get into Russell Group universities. There is a distinction between what are called selective universities, where there are more people trying to get into the places, and recruiting universities who are desperate to fill their classrooms. All of them are a big competitive league.
The change has been good for the education system or detrimental?
They've been mixed, in my opinion. I think we have far more students going to higher education than we did 20 years ago. That's overall a good thing. But the experience they're receiving is increasingly one that, because of the system in which we have now, is one which is more pressured for them. We see far more students working during term time now, which put pressures on the ability to achieve their potential. We have more students coming to higher education from lower socio-economic backgrounds, which is good, but more would like to come. We've seen a huge decline in part-time and mature students, over 50% decline in the past 7 years, the number of part-time mature students going to higher education.
Too costly?
Too costly. If you're not going by the time you're 21, 22, then the chances of higher education for you are increasingly restricted. We've seen new data coming out only tomorrow showing that, particularly for female older students, huge declines. We've seen it in subject areas, changes in nursing funding recently, put pressures on those able to enter nursing or older students. So while we see, more students attending, a different sort of system, whether it's a better system or not, I'm not 100% sure.
But there's a difference here. Either older and part-time students aren't going because they can't afford it, or universities are saying we don't want older and part-time students.
I wouldn't say they don't want them. They're going because they can't afford it. Universities would like to, as Dominic pointed out, the system we have at the moment where greater students bring greater income means most universities, not all, but most, that includes most of the Russell Group, to be fair, will admit more students if they can. The problem is, while younger students are less sensitive, or not sensitive to price so much, older students are. They're not willing to accumulate the debt associated with £9,000 or £6,000 fees, and they're not going to higher education.
Sophie, I'll come to you in just a moment, if I may, because I want to, you're setting up a secondary school, but it's the same sort of thing might apply to universities and whether students are getting value for money. But let me ask you, okay, congratulations, by the way. You got a first from Cambridge, and we'll argue later on about whether that's as worthwhile now as it was perhaps 50 years ago. But do you believe you got value for money for your degree?
So I don't think university education can simply be quantified in terms of money. You make friends. It's a very holistic experience. But what
I mean value for money in the bigger sense.
Well, I do.
Was it worthwhile given the debt you've got and the experiences you've come out with?
So I think I gained a lot from what I didn't spend money on, which was, the friends and the inspiring conversations and the people I met. But in terms of the contact time I had, it was quite minimal. And there was a lot of pressure to achieve that grade. And rather than spending time, exploring, reading and broadening my mind, there was simply not enough time. Everything was geared towards exams, very oriented towards that. And obviously that's a good thing. But when there's the pressure to have your name and your degree class pinned outside the Senate House, which is the building of our the university central administration, there is a lot of pressure, and students...
But there's nothing wrong with pressure. You're going to get pressures throughout the whole of your life. And you went there to get a degree, so you came out with what you want. What I'm wondering is whether Cambridge, as an august institution, was actually treating you fairly in terms of the money you had to pay.
So I think we do have to complicate that, because each person at Cambridge does a very different degree for different lengths. What I found trouble with was accepting that I had to pay £9,000 just the same as another person who had far more contact time, who had labs, who had, you know, lectures every single day, you know, who had seminars, whereas I only had that one supervision once a week and maybe a couple of lectures, but the notes were also uploaded on Moodle, which is like a digital platform.
But I noticed from the notes I've been given that you're suggesting that Cambridge is making £7,000 a year out of students such as you, that your course only costs £2,000, therefore you are being treated as a commodity.
Well,
is that possible?
Well, according to the University Reporter, there's a £7,000 or so funding gap. So what we're paying to the university versus how much it costs them to give us. And that can really be explained by the fact that, you know, we have to pay the rent, the meal costs, you know, to the gowns. There are lots of trimmings in an Oxford education that do cost a lot of money and that do add up over time.
I think the funding cap's slightly the other way. I think what they're actually saying is it costs £16,000 a year to educate a Cambridge student, and you're only getting £9,000. Now, I'm not saying that's true, but that's their argument. Oxford and Cambridge argue because of the system, because of individualised tuition, one-on-one tuition, which you have at Oxford, at Cambridge, which I had at Oxford as well, is very expensive compared to the model that most universities deliver, which is mass seminar-based models, which is large lecture theatres with 200 or 300 students and weekly seminars. Now, I'm not saying for a moment, I'm not privy to the data, I'm not saying that they're correct, but that's been their argument for a long time, and it's one they pushed a lot, Oxford and Cambridge. Their education is more expensive.
Dominic, if I can bring Sophie in at this particular point, you make your point in just a moment. Your idea is to do something in secondary education that is different to what we have at the moment. And I think you believe that that could be transferred to tertiary education as well.
Absolutely.
So what is the idea, and where is the current system wrong?
Well, so the issue of people not getting value for money from the money they're spending on education is true in secondary education and in university education as well, I would say. And for example, parents who are the poorest in the UK right now, their children are getting the worst deal out of the UK's education system. And that's because if you're from a low-income household, you're the least likely to be able to move to a wealthier area where there are inevitably the better performing state schools. That's what the data shows. And you're also not able to send your child to private school.
Sophie, what is your idea? What are you planning to do that's different?
So I am setting up a low-cost, profit-making private school to bridge this gap. There's a massive gap in the market for a lower cost private school. And this issue of not having enough choice and parents paying taxes for education that they don't necessarily value, this transcends secondary education, and which is where I would go on to talk about Vidya, because she's a great example, a first-class degree from Cambridge. And so we're told there's a massive graduate premium across a person's lifetime of hundreds of thousands of pounds if they have a degree. But that's lumping people like Vidya together, and then people who have weaker degrees from lesser-known universities.
Are you suggesting that there are too many frills at the moment in education? This value-added idea that's attracting people, which is not necessarily necessary, and if you stripped those out, people would still get a good education in a different way?
I think the choice is great. Some people want the frills, and that's absolutely fine. But many people, through taxes, have to pay for the frills that education brings. And some people might prefer their child to just go and get that very basic, highly academic, grammar school-like education.
Okay. Dominic, you wanted to jump in, and then I've got some figures I wanted to throw.
Well, I just wanted to say, put on the record, that especially as probably it's an international audience, that when we say paying £9,000 fees, students don't have to pay 1 penny on day one in the UK. What they're doing is taking a loan. Now, at the moment, we've got a complicated situation where non-EU students pay much more, but for UK students and for European students, nobody has to pay anything on day one. They're taking a loan. So when we say paying fees and it's 9,000 quid, it's actually taking on a loan. And I think that's at the basis of our system, and I think that's reasonably fair.
Okay, but that's not what we're talking about in particular today, is it? I mean, we're not talking about student debt, we're talking about value for money.
Value for money is a very interesting and very difficult, notoriously difficult thing to assess, because people say you've got to wait 20 years before you know what the payback will be of your education. It's very difficult 1 week after your course to know how actually that sets you up for a career.
But I think just looking beyond the words of paying up front, loan and all that terminology, the psychological effect for a student coming from, say, a more working class or a poorer background for having to pay, more tuition fees, it will dissuade them. For example, I myself, I wanted to do a master's. I'm not going to do a master's because I don't want to have £9,000 more debt. And debt is a very significant thing, and just because I'm taking out a loan and not having to pay up front doesn't sort of...
Do you mind if we leave all of this side of it for another day? In fact, I think we've already done it. I have no doubt that we will come back to it. But listen to this. 2008, Gillian Evans, lecturer in medieval theology, Oxford University, said, universities are pushing up grades, grade inflation, chasing a place in league tables. That was 2008. We've known about it for, well, she's certainly been out there for a long, long time. So why?
Well, we have
why
a
hasn't
very,
it changed?
we have an ingrained league table culture within higher education in this country, whereas universities will compete on different levels. They want to be at the top of any league table available, and the system's created that. I mean,
why do they want to be top of the league table?
Because
what does it do to them?
prestige allows them to attract more students. In a model where you're funded per student, for most universities need student income to survive. They need to be top of a league table or prominent at a league table to be able to sell it to students, to attract more students, to bring in more income, to be sustainable.
To bring in more income, and yet our universities are charities. Part of it I don't quite get.
And it's interesting that the number of first-class...
They're not
degrees
profit-making
awarded,
institutions, are they?
it depends, like...
Sorry, you were saying about the number of first-class degrees?
Yeah, it's doubled since 1998, and that was when...
It has more than doubled. 1997, 7%, now 26%. It's gone up 5 almost.
Within the decade, it doubled.
Yeah.
So and now it's just is growing exponentially. And there is, I think, definitely. I can only speak for Cambridge University myself, but there is that league table culture. Each college itself competes against each other. There's a league table within colleges.
What is so bad about pressure to go up league tables, pressure to improve results, or not improve them, but say you've improved them? What's wrong with that?
Well, the issue is that if increasing numbers of people have a degree and are now in jobs that do not require a degree, why are we subsidising degrees if it's all just about this race, if we're all paying, using taxpayers' money to signal to each other? A system whereby there was some kind of disincentive to go to university if it's not going to be worth it for you, because that's increasingly the case. And increasing the proportion of people who are in jobs that don't require a degree is multiplying. And so there needs to be some kind of reform whereby universities have an incentive to produce employable graduates. So perhaps a deal between the student and the university that they pay back a certain proportion of their income. And if you're doing an arts degree and you know you're not going to earn that much, you may instead choose to do something else. But right now, tons of people are just being sent to university.
Graeme, I think you
I think tons of people who sent to university is not correctly true. I think we have a participation rate of 18 to 30 of under 50%. The majority of 18 to 30-year-olds are not going to university.
But it has increased.
It's increased, but the majority, yes, but the majority are not going to university. But are choosing not to go to university.
Well, this was a Tony Blair initiative, wasn't it, to get 50% of people going to university?
We've not reached 50%. We're 48% or so now. I mean, in terms of the data, we have to look at the evidence here. The majority of students do enter graduate jobs. The majority of students earn more than if they didn't go to university. A lot of students choose to do courses with the full knowledge that they will earn a certain amount of money afterwards. I'll go back to the nursing issue, which I think is a great concern to us at the moment. We see many people who want to go into a profession where there's a huge shortage of nurses, and they know that in nursing they're not going to earn large amounts of money here. But the changes in the fee structure have made it untenable.
And you mentioned the word reform. Now, a group called Reform says what we need, if we've got too many people getting first-class degrees, we need a measurement system. We need to have a standard set of rules across the country in which people taking a particular subject, such as history in your case, know that they are sitting the same exam and it's being marked exactly the same way across the entire nation. It doesn't happen at the moment. Universities can do what they like. Well, why don't we do that?
Well, the reason that there's a race to get first and then after that a race to get masters and then PhDs, it's because once more and more people have a degree, you need to find other ways to signal your value to employers.
But would it not signal somebody's particular value better if there was a standard examining process in which we knew that your first was better than somebody's 2-1 at another university? I'm not disparaging.
Yeah, but I think the system you're describing wouldn't necessarily produce that. If you're talking about a system that changes from firsts to a grade point average system, a GPA system, for instance, like they have in the States, then it wouldn't necessarily mean that a degree from Cambridge and a degree from Wolverhampton would still be a top GPA.
What it might mean is that somebody from Wolverhampton who has been, and Wolverhampton, let's say fictitious university, who gets a first is not necessarily as qualified as somebody from another institution who gets a first, and we would then know that.
I think the whole reason why we don't have that is because at the root of it, university education is not just about your grade, and any attempt to raise tuition fees according to like, and that's the whole point.
It all comes back to fees, doesn't it, all the time?
No, but it's true. There's the government legislation, the university teaching excellence framework, and they say that universities that comply more with this central framework are able to charge more fees, and an integral part of that framework is how many first people get, and it's very, very easy to circumvent that, to have grade inflation, to change your exam syllabus, so on and so forth, and you're never going to be able to implement a kind of standard examination system.
Okay. Can I ask Dominic? I want to ask Dominic a specific question here, because you've worked in India, you've worked in Egypt, you've worked in Norway, selling ideas about education. Now your job is to sell British education to people who want to come here from overseas. What is the reputation of British universities compared to other countries' universities, and is it going up or down?
It's very difficult to work out the reputation unless you look at numbers of students being recruited, and that may only be one factor. But I mean, the big competitors have been Australia, the US, Canada, Ireland, and New Zealand, and the UK is number 2. The US is the biggest recruiter with nearly 1 million international students. The UK is number 2 at 450,000. That's a very big number. Australia and New Zealand are down. Canada is the one that's really driving up at the moment for numbers of reasons, some of them political. Students who might have wanted to go to the States are now wondering whether it's a welcoming place to go to, going to Canada instead.
But
so
I suppose what I'm
well and keeping its numbers really high, but that doesn't necessarily mean the whole of reputation.
I'm asking you, with your wealth of experience over the years, whether you've noticed a change either for the better or for the worse about the reputation of British universities, which is what we're talking about, because of the way the system has changed.
One of the areas that you may know I'm most closely involved in is actually visa and immigration policy. And that's been something which has hit the perceptions of the UK very substantially. So up to about 2008, 2009, numbers were going up significantly. The Conservative government brought in their policy on cutting net migration. They changed a lot of the rules for students. They cut what's called the post-study work scheme, where students could stay on for 2 years after their degree. And it changed the perceptions of the UK. So I'm not quite sure the university reputation, but the national reputation has taken a bit of a hit over recent years.
As we come towards the end of this programme, I'm going to give Sophie a chance to talk about your project. I know it's not up and running yet, but it is, no frills, if you like, private education at a much lower cost than what we're seeing at either private schools or universities at the moment. Why do you think it will work?
Because a lot of parents in the lower quintile income backgrounds are spending a lot of money on topping up the education that isn't adequate at state schools per week. And we know that many people from our research can afford £100 a week, and so that's why we're aiming for that, to solve this problem whereby the poorest children are getting the worst deal out of the state education system.
And this is going to start when, do you hope?
In the next 2 to 3 years.
In North London?
Yes.
Yeah? And what frills will be missing?
So no theatre, no swimming pool, no science labs, sports halls. It will be highly academic, focused on the sciences, maths and English, and all opportunities for whatever other else ambitions the pupils have will be using the sharing economy.
And you could take that into
Uber-like services,
tertiary education, higher education,
well, yes,
if this is a success.
Yes, Buckingham University is experimenting with the 2-year degree. So some universities are managing to innovate in different ways and cut the frills and have smaller.
That is the future.
Yes.
Okay, well, from a personal point of view, I wish you the very best of luck
Thank
with
you.
that. And it's interesting to hear you say that some of the things that are being cut out are things like the theatre, when you were suggesting that part of what you got out of university was the added experience, perhaps, of meeting people. We'll have to talk about that privately because we come to the end.
I didn't dabble in Cambridge theatre, I'm afraid. But
It
I
wasn't
think-
so much the theatre, it was the sort of all-round experience.
I think there's some things that money can't buy. And I think that's true for any university student going to university. You know, it can be a really life-changing, rewarding experience, but sadly it's not often, you know, the great things aren't often what you pay for.
Thank you. Thank you all very much indeed. We're going to have to leave it on that particular point. The bell has gone. Class is out. We've continued our discussion, or we will continue our discussion once we've left the table, I'm sure of that, and we'll come back to this topic on another occasion on Roundtable. From me, David Foster, from all of you who've taken the time and trouble to come onto the programme, thank you very much for doing so, and thank you for watching. You can find us on YouTube, Roundtable TRT World, YouTube. All our programmes are put there roughly 24 hours after we transmit them. So do take a look and leave us your thoughts. From me, David Foster, and the Roundtable team, goodbye for now.